Brendan, we had more of it today too. What's with this addiction to fear?
That's exactly what it is. It is an addiction. The elites, the political class, seem to be addicted to worst case scenario thinking, to using fear to try to marshal the population to make us do what it wants us to do. And it's a very destructive force, the politics of fear. Firstly, because it makes people feel scared. Secondly, it's the lowest form of politics. Instead of trying to engage with us about the reality of Omicron, which actually looks like a far weaker variant than Delta, which, according to Robert Dingwall, who was a former advisor to the government on COVID issues, he says it looks pretty much like flu in terms of how virulent it is. And so instead of engaging with us and reasoning with us about the truth of Omicron and the fact that it is not the end of the world as we know it, instead they use fear, they use panic, they use dread. It's a really destructive form of political engagement.
And yet we get more of it, Brendan. It's almost like sometimes I feel like we're in this post-truth existence, because we actually have our leaders and our chief medical officers saying, don't look at the evidence, ignore what's happening in South Africa. I just find it completely bizarre.
It is bizarre. It's and they are doing exactly as you described. They're discouraging us from looking at the facts, and the facts in this case seem to be that this is a weaker variant. The risk of hospitalization is far lower than it was for the original COVID and for the Delta variant. And that is from real world studies. That's from looking at real world cases in South Africa. So if you look at the actual facts, there is no reason to panic. There is no reason to shut down society in the way that it looks like we might do in the next few weeks or months. And I think we have to really get a grip on what's happening here. What's happening here is that we are instituting extraordinary restrictions and a culture of fear in response to a virus that doesn't seem to have an extremely high death rate and doesn't seem to have a very high hospitalization rate. And the question on my mind is, are we going to do this all the time? Are we going to do this next time there is a big flu outbreak, which often kills thousands of people? Is this the new normal? That's the question we now need to ask ourselves, because if they can do this in response to Omicron, they can do it in response to any virus that emerges, and that should scare everyone.
Well, unfortunately, Brendan, I think it is, because I cannot understand why we're back in the same place, given all of the protections we have in terms of vaccination, antiviral drugs. So it really does feel like, for whatever reason, leaders have become addicted to this type of power and this type of control. I guess it's pretty surprising to me, though, if you look at this politically, Brendan, that Boris Johnson seems to have just dismissed the second biggest Tory rebellion since the war. I mean, he can't just dismiss this. His MPs are standing up and saying no to lockdowns, no to Plan C. But he said tonight at this press conference he ain't changing.
It's a huge rebellion, and I think it's a real blow to his moral and political authority. He might try to deny that. He might try to brush it under the carpet, but that is the truth of it. And the thing is, this addiction to fear, I think it's so apparent now, because if you look at the language that they're using in relation to Omicron, Boris has said there will be a tidal wave of Omicron. Nicola Sturgeon said there will be a tsunami of infections. They're using this terrifying language of these waves of disease washing over the nation. But as you say, the truth is huge numbers of us have been vaccinated. 95% of Brits have antibodies of one form or another. We know that Omicron the vaccines don't entirely protect against infection by Omicron, but they do seem to protect against serious illness. So this idea that we are just this shivering, scared populace facing this huge wave of disease and doom, that is, to all intents and purposes, that is a lie. That is simply not true. Our politicians are not telling us the truth of the situation that we are currently in. And that is something that should really anger citizens, when our politicians use fear and misinformation to try to cajole us to behave in a certain way.